Make it 10 straight W's for the Winnipeg Jets. And who better than Mark frickin' Scheifele to deliver the Jets when they needed a hero most in overtime? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. We're available on YouTube, Spotify, all of your favorite platforms. Thanks again for joining us. This is the Locked On Winnipeg Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, like I said earlier, the Jets have come away now in incredibly dramatic fashion in overtime, defeating the San Jose Sharks, and they have now become just the first team in NHL history to trail in 2 consecutive games back-to-back in the very final minute, and somehow they have won both. The final minute being in regulation, the Jets have forced overtime in both, and they came away with a victory. A very interesting first team in NHL history to do that, right? Pretty crazy. Winnipeg just seems to be breaking all sorts of records, whether franchise or NHL historical numbers this year. Winnipeg is having the time of its life. Jets fans are having the time of theirs. And yeah, tonight's game, I think in comparison and contrast to the game against St. Louis, in some ways, yes, you could say that the Jets were a little rusty, and I think some of the passing and stuff definitely was a reflection of that. But I would also say that compared to Saturday's game, tonight's game against the Sharks was arguably much better. And I think that there's a temptation sometimes when you see the puck not going into the back of the net, you see Winnipeg occasionally struggling to score against a so-called bottom feeder team. A lot of people are like, well, here come the classical Jets again. And I get it. There have been times where I've fallen victim to that. But I think the Jets this year have earned a level of trust in terms of just waiting to see what they do. Not that I expected them to do what they did and win in overtime with like a last minute, literally last 30 seconds game-tying goal from Josh Morrissey. That's a little dramatic. But I think the Jets have earned a modicum of reservation and trust in a way that, not many seasons have in the past. I just felt like one way or another, the Jets were going to find a way. It was irrational, but, I did say coming into the third period that I sort of expected a win. I didn't know how the team was going to do it. I really didn't care. To me, what I'd seen in the previous periods was that the Jets were kind of dominating, but it was Vitek Vanacek in net that was really holding them off from kind of pulling off what should have been a 3 or a 4 goal lead. Vanacek was sensational. If you look at all of the scoring charts, all of the advanced metrics from this game, whether it's goals saved above expectation, the amount of chances the Jets created, Winnipeg really showed that it was a superior team. Only Macklin Celebrini was giving them any sort of trouble, and in the third period, the only thing that San Jose could really do was just keep finding ways to dump the puck out. The Sharks, they definitely lack in terms of a lot of high-end talent. You saw that reflected in this game, and it was really some poor luck, some missed passes, and some phenomenal saves and shot blocks that kind of kept the Jets from blowing this game wide open. But thank goodness that win number 10 finally came through here. Even if the Jets had lost, I really wouldn't have been upset. I would have just been sad for the team because I feel like, at home, a chance to get your 10th straight win, that would have been amazing. It was very much in the nice to have camp and not really a necessity, but I feel like the boys just deserved it. That sometimes when you have a game like this, that's all you kind of want. You don't really care about, the specific outcome or where it puts the Jets in the standings. You just want them to have a really cool milestone. And for the team to have already broken the franchise record with 9 straight wins, adding one more just felt like such a cool thing, right? Do it for Dale, number 10, and getting your 10th win with his statue outside the rink. How could you possibly not love it? It's just, it feels like a vibe that you can't really describe. Something that I think this fan base has been looking for really since 2017, 2018. Last year, we saw shades of it. This year, I think it's starting to really come back. And with this team just continuing to set expectations of winning, one way or another, whether they play well or not, they come away with victories. It's just great. It's a great feeling. I know the game may not have exactly been sold out, but I think on a Friday a Monday evening against the last place team in the league, probably not super shocking. But anyone who wasn't in attendance did probably miss Mark Scheifele going ahead in the franchise leader scoring race for goal number 329. And the way that he did it was actually pretty funny. I thought, the top line in this game was okay. I think they were a little bit off the pace compared to their usual standards. They got close on some good opportunities, but a lot of those ended up in really good saves, and it just felt like they were not quite as on the same page as they usually are, especially against bad teams, right? But Scheifele, he was in overtime, and I did kind of have the thought of like that one game where he and Connor were out there for forever and ended up losing the game in overtime because they were just on such a long shift. This one, Scheifele was out there, but it didn't really seem like he was tiring out. Felt like the Sharks really didn't pressure him or push him too much, and so he was sort of gliding around out there. And then Ehlers came on, on a line change, and just was like, you know what, I'm taking the puck, I'm going towards the slot, slammed home a shot from up high. The rebound goes to Mark Scheifele, and I'm like, oh, he's going to find a way to tuck this one away. And he actually just sort of poked it past Vanacek. I don't know if it was through the pads or whatever, but either way, you take it. What a fun moment. Apparently, the recorded audio level inside the rink was 114 decibels, which I think is the loudest it's been this season, if I'm understanding it correctly. You could hear it on the broadcast. I mean, it was very quiet at moments throughout the game because I think fans were just waiting for something to cheer for. And then once the goal was there, both the Morrissey and the Scheifele goals, the whole rink just exploded. So that's more like it, right? We miss those days when back in the MTS days when it was just deafening and you could go anywhere in the rink and it was just a wall of noise. Very much like when you go to like a Seahawks game or something in Seattle. We haven't really seen the rink get that loud over the past few years. So any reason to rip your lungs out and basically blow it out with reckless abandon, I think we're all looking for. And the Jets delivered. So awesome for the team. Really couldn't ask for a better outcome. And for the Jets, here you are with a chance to add yet another win on Wednesday or whatever. So Winnipeg, I'm pretty sure, is feeling great about things right now. The fans come away happy. I wouldn't have really been upset in the usual sense if the Jets had lost. I just would have felt disappointed for the team. I feel like they've deserved a great result. This game, they really were getting goalied. And I guess if you're going to lose, hitting a couple of posts and having the opposing goalie make a bunch of crazy saves is probably about as acceptable a way to go down as it gets. But thankfully, this team just doesn't know when to quit. They don't seem to understand the concept of stopping when they, could just kind of lay down and let it go. This team will fight to the last whistle, and they have been rewarded twice in a row with tremendous come-from-behind wins. And sure, you could say it's against the measly Sharks, but you know what? This is still a professional NHL franchise. They still have 15 wins, and I think the Sharks in particular this year are one of those teams where they're fun, right? They will lose a lot of games, but they will still find ways to create offense, especially when Celebrini is on the ice. So don't take them lightly. Always be aware that any given Sunday, you could have one of the biggest upsets of the whole season. But thankfully, not this time. Now, amidst all of this, actually, there were a lot of scouts in attendance for this game, and David Pagnotta had some notes from his recent blog post, and the Jets were featured on there. I want to chat about that in a little bit and, what it may imply about what's coming, because the trade deadline is next week. I think we are all eagerly anticipating something, and what that something is could take a lot of different forms. I've talked about it for weeks now, but we are finally in the end game for the Jets, and this has the potential to be one of the biggest moments of Cheveldayoff's career, which he's had a few, but this one, something about this one, I'm telling you, man, it feels just a little bit different. We'll chat about that in just a brief second, but before we do, thought you should hear about our partners at Indeed. You just realized your business needs to hire somebody yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Well, it's easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's Sponsored Jobs puts your post first at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. I've used Indeed when I was looking for work. I can personally attest to how easy the resume builder is. And when I actually put my whole profile in, I submitted it, saved it, all that stuff. You know what it did? It pulled up great jobs that not only matched my work experience, my salary requirements, also my domains of interest. It gave me stuff that was really personally relevant to me, and it pulled up those job descriptions almost immediately. It was super easy, literally could not have been faster. And if you're a business, I have to imagine it has to be such a great way to connect with great candidates even faster. Now, you can speed up your hiring process with the $75 sponsored job credit. Just visit Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on the Locked On Winnipeg Jets podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about interesting rumors. The Jets are really in the end game now for the trade deadline here, rolling up just in a little over a week, really about 11 or so days. And if there's a team that I think is truly poised to do something very big or just crazy, it's probably Winnipeg. I think the Jets are in as good of a position as they've ever been. They've got a pretty good prospect pool. They've got a number of draft picks that they can pay out. And I think in some ways, they also have a couple of roster players that other teams could potentially be interested in. So Winnipeg is kind of in an interesting spot. David Pagnotta was writing about this earlier. And like Pagnotta, I don't always subscribe to all that closely because sometimes he speculates and it can go in not great directions. But with the Jets, he talked about the team doing one of two things, right? So he said they could add a depth piece or two, but he says that there's chatter about them doing something bigger. And apparently the asset that the Jets would be dangling is Colby Barlow. For me, I found this particular mention to be interesting. I don't know if Pagnotta is speculating here. Barlow, for me, is probably one of our mid-tier prospects. But if the league perception of him is that he is this really talented, really lethal goal scorer, after this low start, he's started to pick up the scoring rates recently. I could see him having some legitimate value. I think with what I've seen from him over the past couple of seasons or so, I just feel like he's got some talent with a great release, and he's a big, strong, physical player. I think the problem with him is that I've always felt that his ceiling is capped because the skating is decent, but the elite, technical ability maybe isn't quite there. And that's where I've sort of thought that, as a middle six tertiary guy, I think he has a real pro career ahead, and a good one too. I just don't know if it's going to be the kind that you really are thinking has to be as part of the Jets. Winnipeg kind of needs players who can help right now. And Barlow maybe a little further off. I know that he's relatively physically mature compared to a lot of his peers, but I think for what Winnipeg is looking for, they're going to have a more finished product here in the next season or this season. And if Barlow is the one that they're shopping, it does kind of signal that maybe they're not really going for some of the bigger names. Because I feel like if you're looking for a big name player, you'd be shopping a Lambert or something of that caliber. But the Jets looking more towards their B-level prospects, I think is curious. So Jaeger not being immediately mentioned, also interesting. Maybe it suggests that Winnipeg is a little more protective of Lambert and Jaeger and some of those guys. It could also just be, again, that Pagnotta is mostly speculating here, and he's not really identifying the top level prospects. I can't tell you for sure. But the fact that, we've heard rumors about the Jets maybe looking for something different than their usual MO of just going for rentals, to me signals some real interesting stuff. And with the Islanders scouts, but in attendance for this game against the Sharks, I think that there could be something there. The Sharks are obviously a team that a lot of squads are going to be talking to. Colorado, Vegas, Florida, Tampa, they were all in attendance at this game. And I'm sure plenty of players like Wallman and Ferraro will draw real interest. But I think the Islanders being in attendance might be for something else. And I don't know if it's because they're looking maybe at some of Winnipeg's middle six players. Maybe they're trying to look at Ehlers or something. I don't know. But Winnipeg definitely has some real interest in their players and some of their expiring contracts. I think Dobson would be like a dream level ad. Barzal also kind of in the dream level ad territory. He also has some complicating factors, like he's injured right now, so that makes things less clear. But for the Jets, this is an interesting opportunity. And the more that the media kind of starts to hone in on Winnipeg, going beyond just depth pieces, I think that's better for us. We want Winnipeg to be taking a big swing here. A depth piece or two is great, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it moves the needle the way that the Jets really should be going for. I've said it a lot over the past couple of weeks and really the past couple of months. This year feels like it might be the best opportunity the Jets have to go on a deep run than they might have in the following years. Every so often you run into an ideal situation where either your roster is just crazy good compared to everyone else, or the playoff field that you're facing is not that great. And so your squad relative to everyone else kind of sits above that, even if it's maybe not as good as it was in previous years. I think right now, as the Jets are, they're not quite as good as the 17-18 squad, but they're still good enough to be near one of the top contenders in the current structure, right? And so a trade deadline could be unbelievably transformative for this team. Winnipeg could look like a totally different squad here after Friday. And I do think that at some point, we're going to see some players moved out. I don't know who would be maybe getting shipped off to greener pastures. I do think Ville Heinola at this point is probably going to be one of those guys. I would probably think about trying to move Stanley's contract. Logan has become a fixture on this blue line, and if he's in the playoff lineup, I do worry about that. You've already got Pionk, who at times can be a little chaotic with his puck decisions. Sandberg covers a lot of it, don't get me wrong, but you can only account for so many of your players making those kinds of decisions. And I think you saw tonight Stanley really struggling at some of the basic stuff, right? Some of the basic zone clearances didn't really go well. You saw him turn over the puck right in front of Hellebuyck at one point. Helly had to really come out very far to challenge the shooter. And so that kind of stuff, it's routine with him. And I understand why the team still wants to try and make him work, but you got to figure out at some point that the dude is 26. He's spent, nearly a decade with the org. He really hasn't improved enough to where I feel comfortable with him in a playoff lineup. That's just it, right? You need legitimate, reliable experience or skill, and I just don't think he brings it. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I think Heinola brings it either. We don't really know what Ville is. And at this point, we're not really going to find out because Arniel doesn't trust him. So if the coaching staff doesn't trust Heinola and they do trust Stanley, you're going to have to maybe make some moves here. I think Stanley fights hard. I think he's a hard worker. I think that he, lays it all out, but it's just not working. The dude cannot make, the kinds of plays that you need him to on a routine basis. And the Jets don't have the margin for error to allow for him to, keep trying to figure things out. I respect the amount of hard work that he's put in, but this team kind of has to start thinking about what it is that they need to do to not only win in the first round, but also win beyond. The Jets know that this is the cup window. They know that they have to go for it this year. Hellebuyck is playing out of his mind. The Jets forwards generally are playing pretty well. Your top line is generally producing on most nights. You got to make something happen here. And so whatever it takes, even if it's going to be a hard decision, this team is really going to have to examine every option and really make the right choice to put the squad in the best position it's been in years to win a cup. I feel like if there was ever a year that I'm getting those 17-18 vibes again, it is this one, man. There is something about this team and this run that feels like it is time. And so it's time to cash those chips in, make the moves, give Arniel the tools he needs to succeed, and let the rest play out. I think that, this team is generally on board with a lot of the right decisions. I think that there's stuff that they still need to work on. The Stanley blind spot has kind of been a real pressing issue with this team because the third pairing is, really struggling recently. But if you make a good trade deadline acquisition, whether it's a Jamie Alexiak, a Jake Wallman, something of that nature, maybe you move a contract out, maybe you find a way to upgrade on Appleton or Kupari or something. I think the Jets really could be in business. But I'm also hoping that they're setting their sights on even bigger targets. If you go after a McCann, if you find a Besser, I'm really all ears for almost anything. There aren't many doors that I would prefer to be closed. Uh, Other than like Pareko, Lawton, those kinds of doors, I'm a little less interested in those. But for the most part, if the price is right, bring them in. This team is going to be thrilled with the acquisitions. I think whoever comes in will probably fit this team very well and hopefully help this squad get beyond not only the first round, but really the subsequent rounds. If you do that, I think you are going to have yourself a real fun playoff time. And I'm already, having to make plans to start my passport renewals because I want to be there if the Jets really do go deep. It's been a long time since I was last in Winnipeg. I'm personally very excited about their odds this year. I know that I have my own reservations about how far I think they're going to go, but the fan side of me is also just ready for some real playoff hockey, man. I don't want to speed up the timeline because I feel like we've still got a ways to go, and I want to take and appreciate the regular season while we've still got it because there's still plenty of games left, and the Jets are still chasing a President's Trophy. But all I can say is bring on that playoff, baby. I'm ready for a deep, deep run and for Hellebuck to finally get his due. But uh, of course, with all of that being said, let's take a look at who the Jets could potentially play in the first round. We'll do that in just a brief moment. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about all sorts of fun stuff. Obviously, Winnipeg is in a really good spot. So far, they're top of the division, they're top of the league. They have a real good shot at securing home ice advantage throughout the playoffs. And for Winnipeg, that's kind of crucial. Their home form is almost unbeatable. They're still really good on the road. They're 18-9-0 on the road, but at home, they're 23-5-3. And so, with all of that in mind, the Jets do have a couple of potential first-round opponents, and I think the mixture is pretty interesting. They're going to be facing a wild card team first, and there are like four-ish clubs, maybe five if you are really generous, that could potentially kind of filter into one of these spots. Incredibly, Anaheim is actually one of them. I'm not really worried about Anaheim. I'm not even really thinking about them. I think that they're probably far enough back in this race to where I really can't see them leapfrogging enough of the teams above them to actually be in a wild card, but they're there. So technically, I'll talk about them. They are there. That's what I'll say. The teams I'm really looking at, though, are Colorado, Vancouver, Calgary, and at a stretch, Utah. I think this is probably your foursome unless one of Minnesota or Dallas really spirals and the Avs kind of bump up. I don't see that happening. I really think it would be a stretch for it to do so. Minnesota might be the team that's the most potentially vulnerable to this sort of drop, but it really require the Avs for them to improve themselves. And Colorado's kind of been all over the place. When the McKinnon line is not owning everything, the rest of the team is a little bit 50-50, but the goaltending has improved a lot. I think that's going to be a big deal. Both Wedgwood and Blackwood, really funny that they have both goalies named Wood. I think that that's really helped them stabilize in net. And so the rest of it may sort of come naturally over the next couple of weeks. And they are only out of the 3 seed by about 4 points. But Minnesota and Dallas all have games in hand. So I wouldn't be worried about that too much yet. For the Jets, though, that does mean that they might have a shot at facing Colorado if Vancouver or Calgary or any of these other teams kind of in this middle of the pack eventually, get a better win streak, get past Colorado, and put them in the 2-seed spot. It's not guaranteed, by the way, that Colorado even makes the playoffs. But I think given that they've got a fair few points above some of the teams that are chasing them, I would not really expect them to miss yet. But it is a very fluid situation. There's still a little over 20 games left for a lot of these teams. Colorado is not really, running away with things. And so if the Jets were to face them in the playoffs, I think Winnipeg has a really legitimate chance of ousting them. Colorado, once you figure out the top line, which that's easier said than done, let's be real. There's no real figuring out the top line. It's just you have to hope that McKinnon misses and Makar isn't able to carry the rest. If you get past that, though, their depth is good. It's winnable, though. And with the big trade deadline, the Jets would very clearly have the matchup advantage. That hasn't always mattered when the Colorado speed has been a real factor, but I just don't think it's going to be like last year where Bones had a really rigid system, things were less likely to shift, and the Jets really couldn't slow them down at all. I don't see that happening the same way. I think we've already seen signs in the first couple of games that the Jets could potentially survive a 7-game series here. And with the Avs not really being all that deep, especially past the top line, I'm just a little less worried about them. Vancouver, also, if that's the team that the Jets face in the first round, I think that very much favors Winnipeg. Vancouver itself is going through a lot of chaos right now. The goaltending situation's all over the place. There are potential pieces being moved here. Pettersson's not really guaranteed to still be Canuck by the end of next week. Now, the odds of him moving are probably lower than 1%, but it is technically possible. I'm looking more at guys like Besser, though, maybe Garland. Those are players who could potentially be swapped out. I don't know what Vancouver's plan is because they're not really good enough to be a contender, but they're also not bad enough to where they're like really in sellers territory, at least from the front office's perspective. If I'm them, I'd probably be selling. I don't think that they're really all that great. And even if they move up in the standings to maybe take a spot somewhere in number 3 for the Pacific, it's just not worth it, right? You're chasing after stuff that's really not going to last all that long, even if you make the playoffs. And you're gonna have a lot of expiring contracts who don't really figure into your long-term plan. So if I'm the Canucks, I'd probably be thinking about letting some guys go. And if the Jets face them, it's not going to be a particularly happy series for them. I think Winnipeg is going to basically rip through Vancouver, and I don't think it'll be that close. Colorado will at least have the potential to scratch out maybe 2 games, but I still think the Jets in the end come away with that one. First time I'd ever say that for a playoff matchup, but that's kind of just my general vibe with this team. Calgary is an interesting one because they're kind of in the Vancouver bucket, but I think that they're a little bit stingier. And because of that, that could be an issue for the Jets. Wolf has done a fabulous job in net for them. He still can't really cover the lack of elite depth and stuff. And I think that that could be one of their big Achilles heels once they reach the postseason, right? And it's not like they have a ton of top end talent to begin with, anyways. I think Zary is still injured, if I understand it correctly, or maybe he's just coming back. But Calgary, yeah, the Flames they are what they are. They're a decent team. I think they're better than I expected them to be, but I don't really see them surviving in the playoffs very long. Utah, if they ever figure out their health situation, they could be one of the real dark horses to be a problem. They play a very up-tempo style. They're very fast. They've got really legitimate skill, but I also don't know what their plan is come trade deadline. They're a team that I've thought about for a trade partner for the Jets, and if they do become sellers, then obviously you'd be a little less concerned about them getting into the wild card spot. But these teams, these 4, I really do think kind of give the Jets pretty decent odds of getting out of the first round. This feels like one of the years where, I'm not as worried about a first round matchup really screwing the Jets. Winnipeg will have home ice. They've got the best goalie in the league, the best power play. They are one of the stingiest teams, both on paper and really in the score box. And so I think too much is going the right way. Maybe the subsequent rounds are where you start to get a little nervous. If you face a Dallas or a Vegas, what happens after that? That's a little more debatable, but let's just get through the first round. Then we can kind of parse out what to do with round number 2. At this point, I'd even just accept a first playoff game win, then maybe a second one if I'm really being greedy, and we can sort out the rest of the round after that. We're setting really high bars here, obviously, but this team, they're on a 10-game winning streak. Let's be real, right? The Jets are vibing, and it's only a matter of time before they hopefully go on a deep run. But give me your predictions for the first round. What team do you think will face? Who do you want the Jets to face in the first round? Drop your thoughts below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow, we are welcoming a special guest, Alex Adams. He covers the Ottawa Senators, and I think it's going to be a great time. We're going to talk about the game on Wednesday, kind of talk a little bit about the overall Ottawa season. It's been a weird one for them. They were a team that was expected to be a lot better and really compete. And so far, it's not really happened. So we'll get Sportsnet's opinion on him by way of, not only his podcast, the Behind the Play podcast, but also his insights onto the Sun season. He's been around the locker room. He's chatted with the guys. He'll have a better sense of what to expect. And maybe, just maybe this year, we're going to see some, legitimate playoff contenders emerge from Canada. We haven't had as many lately. I know that Edmonton last year went on a cup run, but other than that, a lot of the Canadian teams have kind of been a little under the par. So maybe this year we finally have more than one or two teams that really stand out from the pack. But we'll chat about all of that with Alex tomorrow, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. We will see you back here tomorrow with more Jets coverage, so see you then. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets, go.